Victory or death! Give them hell!
Good morning, ladies and gents. So, back with another video, and this time around we're going to be looking at a tier list for the weapons. If they need a buff, if they need a nerf, or if they are just right in terms of balance right now. Now, I know I'm probably going to get some shit for this video. Bear in mind, this is my own subjective opinion. By all means, if you agree with me or if you disagree with me, both are absolutely fine, but leave me your comments down below with your reasons why. But make sure you watch the entire video first, because I will explain the reasoning why each weapon is where it is. So please don't be like someone that I have had in the past on one of my previous tier list videos, where they have literally just skipped to the end and then ask me questions why I've put stuff where it is. I explain everything as I go through the video. Before we get into the video though, hit that subscribe button if you want to be kept up to date with the latest and greatest of Conquerors Blade. So then, onto the tier list. Like I said just now, this is going to be pretty subjective, but I believe I'm pretty close there anyway. Obviously, if you do disagree, or even if you agree with the list, let me know down in the comments below. But please, make sure you watch the whole video before you comment, because I will explain stuff as I'm going through the video. So, starting off with the short sword. So the short sword has, over the course of the last few months to the last few seasons, actually been one of those powerhouses. Actually, it is fallen by the wayside a little bit in terms of its damage output and everything like that. However, short swords are a tank class. They are not meant to be damage dealing classes. They still have their ultimate, which is their big splash kind of damage, and it still does the job. I think personally the short swords right now are in a just right position, because they are still tanky, they are still usable, and they are still useful. However, if you build a whole team of short swords, you are going to be lacking the damage potential, which is how it should be. They are not a damage dealing class. Right now, I think short swords are just right in terms of balance. Moving on to the Glaive. The Glaive has had a buff the last season. However, that buff was very poor, and it only buffs skills that people do not use. It is still in a place where it really needs a bit of love and attention and everything. However, I don't think it's as bad as some of the other classes I'm going to go into. For that reason, I think the Glaive needs to go into the minor buff category. It needs its blunt damage back. It needs its blunt damage powerhouse potential back. That is what the Glaive is meant to be, is a glass cannon kind of real big burst damage class, for it to then get swarmed by people if they stay in fights without their skills, or with their skills still on cooldown. And that is where the balance of the Glaive comes, which for some reason seems to have been forgotten. It is meant to be one of, if not the most damage heavy classes, with the balance aspect of it can get swarmed very easily. Right now though, it needs a minor buff. There's not a lot of Glaive users around, and just a little tweak of the kind of blunt damage potential and everything, I think will really bring this back into line, with it being being one of the more balanced over the last few seasons until it had that major blunt damage nerf. It needs that minor buff to bring it back into line. The Pike is quite an interesting one. So the Pike, I think, is one of those classes which actually not a lot of people do play, but those that play it very well. In terms of where it needs to actually be on this list though, I think it needs to go into the just right category. It is one of those classes you really need to take the time to learn to play. Once you actually do that, the damage output, the kind of potential of the Pike class is very good and very useful. It is, again, not a class that you want 15 of them on your team, because that is not going to be any use to anybody. But the Pike is very good in 1v1 against units, all the rest of it, but you need to take the time to actually learn to play it. That is what catches a lot of people out, because it is a little bit different to all the other classes. You've got to take the time to learn to play Pike. But in terms of kind of its potential output and everything right now, I think it is in a perfect spot where it needs to be, in comparison to all the other classes. Now moving on to the Longbow. The Longbow is a class which has been has just been totally forgotten about. It has fallen to the wayside. You never see anybody play the Longbow, which is a real shame. So for that reason, the Longbow definitely needs to go into that major buff category. I do play it sometimes when I get challenged to on stream. It is a horrific weapon to play. It has no damage output. It has no potential. You can get easily caught out if you are not really looking at what you're doing. It's a real shame, and I'm not saying I don't like the class. I'm just saying that right now it needs a major buff to bring it back up into line with all the other weapon classes. There is a reason why you never see anybody playing it. Right now it is just not viable against all the other classes in the game. On that kind of avenue and train of thought as well, the Dual Blades used to be a really good solid powerhouse class. Right now it isn't. It needs to be buffed, but I'm kind of comparing it to the Longbow and the other class I'm going to put in the major buff category. I don't think it needs that much of a buff, but it definitely does need some form of a buff, which is why I'm going to stick it into the minor buff category. It needs a bit of a buff to bring it back up into line with all the other classes. It's a very difficult and skilled class to play. I am not saying it's not viable. It is still viable if you have someone that knows how to play the class very, very well, but it's one of those that actually it's been hurt by numerous kind of nerfs over the seasons, and even though those nerfs are fairly small, because they have had they've been numerous kind of nerfs for the Dual Blades, it has really hurt it really bad. And again, just much like the Longbow, there is a reason why you don't see many Dual Bladers nowadays. It's because it is just a class that is not as viable as some of the other classes, which is a real shame, because the Dual Blades brings a whole different dynamic to kind of strategy and siege battle gameplay and the TW gameplay as well. It's a real shame. It's a real useful class, just needs that little bit of buff to kind of bring it back into line. Now the Musket. The Musket is again quite an interesting one. It was really, really powerful a few seasons ago. This season, however, again, it seems to have kind of slowing down a little bit. There's not as many people playing the Musket. I am kind of torn between just right and minor buff. I think in comparison to the Glaive, the Dual Blades, all these other weapon classes I'm going to put in there, I think right now the Musket is probably just right though. I think it is useful. It is still powerful if you build it right, and it can really pump out that damage. A very slight kind of tweak, kind of buff is gonna help it, but I don't think it needs to sit in the minor buff category. I think those weapons that are sat in that category at the minute really need that buff to bring it back into line with with all the other weapons. I think right now Musket is much the same as Pike. It's got its uses. You need to take the time to actually learn how to play it properly, and I think over the next season or so, once all the other different weapons get different buffs, nerfs, all the rest of it, I think we will start seeing a lot more people playing the Musket again. The Shortbow. The Shortbow unfortunately falls right into the same category as the Longbow. Although the Shortbow is a little bit more viable than the Longbow, it still suffers badly against every single other weapon class. The damage output of it is very poor. You can get caught out very easily on the Shortbow as well, and right now I cannot see any potential benefit in playing either the Longbow or the Shortbow in sieges or in TW. There are some very good bow players, and those very good bow players can take out siege equipment and all the rest of it, but once that has kind of been done, they are not really any kind of use to the team at that point, which is a real shame. I think having ranged classes is very good, but they need some massive buffs to bring them back up into line with stuff. It may not be damage buffs, it may be skill buffs, I don't know, I'm not a dev, but I think some major changes really need to be done to both the ranged weapon classes in the game at the minute. Now Nodachi. Nodachi was I don't know how it keeps swinging from roundabouts in this game, but Nodachi last season was not viable. It would have been straight into that major buff category. Right now, it needs to go into the minor nerf category. I don't think it's so OP that it needs to go into the major nerf category. The Nodachi still can get caught out. I don't have a problem against Nodachis on a kind of general average. I know some people do. but as long as they're not anywhere near units, I think you're going to be fine against a Nodachi. Their lifesteal ability is just too much, I feel, at the minute. It needs to be nerfed down somewhat. And yes, Nodachi is all about unit killing. That's its whole kind of prowess on the battlefield. That is its kind of niche. But I think right now, when you can kill 4 woodcutters and go straight back to full health, that weapon class needs a nerf somewhat. Again, don't think it needs a major nerf. I think it just needs a minor tweaking on its lifesteal ability mainly. I think the recent buff that it's had has actually brought it back up into line with a lot of the other weapon classes. Just needs that kind of slight tweaking to just get it really into line with everything now. Now the Poleaxe. The Poleaxe is again one that has been forgotten about over the course of the last few seasons. However, I think it has unfortunately had to go into the major nerf category because the CC abilities from Poleaxe are freaking ridiculous at the minute, and that is not just from personal experience, that is the general consensus of every player in the game right now. Poleaxe CC abilities are just too much. It is ridiculous when they can CC you into another CC, into another CC, and it's just, you have not got a chance against it. The whole point of weapon balancing and class balancing is so every weapon class will have somewhat of a chance against everything else. Yes, there will always be natural competitors and there will be natural kind of strengths and weaknesses, but overall you want everything to kind of be viable in comparison to everything else. Right now the Poleaxe, I literally had a game the other night where there were 12 Poleaxes out of 15 on the enemy team, which was utter ridiculous, and the amount of CC from Poleaxes is just disgustingly high at the minute. It needs to be toned down a little bit. Some of the skills I don't think should be doing CC or whatsoever, and some of the skills need their CC turned down a little bit. I think right now Poleaxe is actually the only weapon class that needs a major nerf to bring it back into line with everything else. Moving from major nerf to major buff, I think you can all see this one coming, and that is going to be the longsword and shield. Now I know there are some of you longsword and shield players out there that absolutely love the weapon class, and again, I'm not poo-pooing the weapon or the class. I'm saying it's a decent weapon class with its uses, but right now you guys and girls need a major buff to bring it back up into line with everything else. Its heal ability is okay, its support function is alright, its tankiness not as good as the short sword, I would say. It's just the long sword and shield does not seem to have found its feet in the game yet, which is a real shame now the game's been going for so long. It just does not seem to have found its feet yet. I think it needs a major buff. A major buff in terms of its kind of abilities and everything like that. There are some strong abilities which are quite good at the minute, but generally, again, on a whole, I will 9 times out of 10 always be a long sword and shield, which is not how it should be. It should be 50-50 really at best. If you are finding that you are literally 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 destroying a weapon class every single game, you know that that weapon class needs a buff, and that is how I feel right now with both the bow classes and the long sword and shield. Moving on to the spear. The spear is a bit of a weird one, and I'm going to hold my hands up here and say I'm not actually too sure, because there's not a lot of spear players left in the game. Because of that fact alone, I don't think it needs a major buff, but I think it definitely needs a minor buff. It just doesn't seem to have anything going for it, unfortunately, whereas all the other weapon classes seem to have something that they're really good at, and the spear doesn't seem to really have anything at all. It can go quite quick on horseback with its kind of charge, but that's about it really. I don't really know what else to say about the spear, to be honest. I think it just needs a minor buff to kind of get it back into the spotlight of players, to just really get players playing it again. It's a real shame because the spear used to be really good and there were some fantastic spear players rocking about before. Nowadays, I can't remember generally the last time I saw a spear, and when I did, it didn't really stick out at all, which is a real shame. But I think minor buff for the spear will bring it back up into line with everything. Now the Maul seasons ago, straight into the major nerf, every single list that I watched and I made, but right now I think actually the Maul is the most balanced it has been since its release, and for that it's going to go into that just right category. I think right now as it stands, the Maul, it doesn't need a buff, it doesn't need a nerf. I think just leave it as it is and then just focus on all those other weapon classes that needs buffs and nerfs right now. But that is my list. I hope you kind of agree with it. I know there will be a somewhat slight changes, slight kind of, you'll think a few slight different things to what I do, but remember this is over just my course of gameplay. This is through my matches. This is my own subjective opinion of how the weapon classes stand at the moment at the end of season 11. As always, if you don't agree, then let me know your reasons down below. However, if you are going to say, I think it's pretty pointless because you're probably not watching anyway. If you are going to put a comment down below, make sure you have watched the whole video first, because I explain the reasons why each weapon is where it is in the video. Thank you very much for watching though, folks. Please do hit that like button, share this video around, let me know your thoughts down below, and I hope to catch you out on the battlefield.